I approached the small wooden podium set up in front of the semicircle of chairs. Public speaking had always been my least favorite activity, ever since junior high speech classes. My knees trembled, and I worried my voice might falter. Glancing at the 18 men seated before me, I inhaled deeply to calm my nerves and began. "Hello, my name is Gary," I said, pausing briefly to steady myself. "And I am a—" I trailed off, waiting nearly 20 seconds, gauging their reactions. Most seemed taken aback, their faces reflecting shock or blank stares. None of them smirked at my self-deprecating opening line. "Well, not technically," I added quickly, my tone bitter. Having that label associated with me infuriates me. This is my second time attending, and after listening to several of your stories, I decided to share my own. I paused, letting the words settle. Unlike many of you, I'm still married. My attorney advised anger management counseling while preparing my divorce case and getting everything in order. So far, it seems to be helping. At least I haven't killed anyone yet. This last comment earned a few chuckles and faint smiles from the group. Before all of this began, I never considered myself gullible or unobservant. I truly believed I was a devoted husband and soon-to-be proud father. I never viewed myself as a victim or a failure. I wasn't the best at everything I did, but I consistently performed well. In high school, I ranked in the top third of my class, and I carried the same level of achievement into college, graduating with a respectable 3.4 GPA. It was more than enough to secure a spot in graduate school, where I performed similarly while working part-time as an accountant. After finishing my graduate degree, I secured a solid position as a CPA, believing I was on a steady path to success. Then, everything fell apart. Excelling in academics and finances was one thing, but having your very identity and sense of worth ripped away is the worst pain a man can endure. To have your wife show, if not outright say, that you're not enough for her is devastating. As the memory flooded back, I felt my chest tighten and started to hyperventilate. Gripping the podium like a lifeline in turbulent waters, I apologized. "Sorry, I got a little off track there." Two men in the front row gave me supportive nods and a thumbs up, silently encouraging me to continue. "Let me back up," I said, regaining focus. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you how gorgeous my wife is, or go into details about her body. I'm not going to claim we had some red-hot intimate life with daily adventures. But I will say this. We were active, and outside of the bedroom, I thought we had a solid relationship. She was my best friend and life partner, or so I believed." I paused, scanning the group before continuing. "Ava and I met during my last semester of college. We hit it off immediately and got married the following summer. I landed a decent accounting job quickly, which allowed me to pay for her to finish her degree. After gaining the required work experience, I earned my CPA and Ava became a paralegal. Recently, she's expressed interest in attending law school." I snorted at that. "Good luck with that," I told her. "I won't be footing the bill." This drew a few chuckles from the audience. With 2 sets of student loans, we decided to delay having kids or buying a house until we felt financially stable. Last year, after 5 years of marriage, we finally purchased an older 4-bedroom home. I completely renovated it, gutting it to the studs and even altering the floor plan to match our vision. My older brother is a contractor specializing in remodeling homes, and I worked with him every summer during school. I felt confident I had the skills to transform the house into exactly what Ava and I envisioned. My brother assisted at the start and got his subcontractors to give me discounted rates for tasks outside my expertise. Many were already my accounting clients, so part of the work was a barter arrangement. Financially, we didn't invest much, but the house's current value would be 3 times what we spent. Ava seemed thrilled. 6 months ago, she announced she was ready to start a family. Within 2 months, she shared the news that she was pregnant. I should have been ecstatic, and initially I was. But something felt off. The baby likely isn't mine. At this point, I almost hope I'm right. I don't know how long Ava has been unfaithful, but in hindsight, I suspect it's been at least the past year. She had plenty of opportunities while I was working long hours as an accountant and spending weekends renovating our home. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how I found out about Ava's affair. Several men nodded in unison, prompting me to continue. There were no obvious signs, no late nights, no sudden showers after coming home, no men's underwear left behind. It started with a phone call. I overheard Ava talking in the bedroom, thinking she was alone. She was discussing what to pack for an upcoming business trip, and from her tone, I assumed she was speaking to a female colleague. But then I heard something odd. Ava said something about bringing a big strap-on and how she wasn't sure she could handle it much longer with her baby bump. She added, "I know you said I could take it rough up until just before delivery, but this is my first, not my third like you." She laughed and continued, "No way am I letting you use that huge toy on my back end again. It stretches me out too much. I've been doing extra Kegels so Gary doesn't notice anything's off when I come home." I froze. Then she laughed again, saying, "Doug's barely bigger than Gary, so I'm not worried there. But your toy is massive. Doug is her boss." She mentioned he had been with her more frequently than I had in the past 6 months, and the timeline matched her trip to New Orleans when I was working late nights. You might think I couldn't recall this much detail, but here's the thing. I recorded the conversation on my phone. I've listened to it dozens of times since. I paused, scanning the room as I finished. At first, I thought it was impossible, but the recording doesn't lie. And now, here I am, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces. I reached out to a security expert my brother often uses, and he set up a few hidden cameras and recording devices in my home. He also provided smaller ones I could slip into Ava's purse and briefcase. The results were eye-opening. I caught her in our bed multiple times while I was at work, and the audio recordings revealed even more. She was having intimate encounters with both her boss and the legal secretary, sometimes together. The secretary, by the way, is married with kids. From what I gathered, these activities took place whenever they had the chance. Her boss would alternate between the two women at work, and sometimes the women would entertain themselves. It made me wonder how any work got done. The therapist I've been seeing encouraged me to think about why Ava might have sought intimacy outside our marriage. Was it the long hours apart? Did she feel neglected and crave emotional or physical connection? I gave him the same response I'll share with you. I don't care. She cheated. It's as simple as that. If she felt lonely or dissatisfied, she could have talked to me, asked for more time together, but she didn't. She chose infidelity, and that's all that matters. That's about all I have to say for now. Thanks for letting me vent. Currently, I'm in the process of divorcing her. She left this morning for yet another out-of-town trip with some corporate client, and yes, the boss and secretary are tagging along. Before I could step away from the podium, a burly, rough-looking man spoke up. "Why didn't you go teach the guy a lesson?" he asked. When my ex was messing around, the guy ended up with a broken jaw, and let's just say, other injuries. Cops called it a random attack since no one saw anything. The room erupted in laughter. I told them I hadn't confronted Ava yet and was still planning my next steps. A few gave me incredulous looks, clearly surprised. The main reason I attend these meetings is to keep my anger in check. Trust me, I've imagined using a baseball bat or worse on her boss. But I'm not about to end up in prison for revenge. That whole macho idea of fighting for your woman is nonsense. She's not my woman if she doesn't want to behave like it. Another man asked if I'd checked whether my wife's body had changed from her extracurricular activities. I haven't touched her since that conversation, I replied. That same night, I tested positive for COVID and quarantined in the guest room. I may hold the record for the longest positive test. 3 weeks. I even looked it up online and saw it can last a month in some cases. Plus, with her pregnancy, it's safer this way. Let's just say I'm staying distant. My comment drew smiles and nods of approval. After stepping away from the podium, the group's moderator, a therapist, thanked me for sharing so openly. He encouraged me to keep attending the meetings and continue with our private sessions. I told him I'd consider it. I might need another outlet for my anger eventually. For now, though, the lion remains caged. I'd started seeing him on my lawyer's recommendation, who warned that I was teetering on the edge and needed a way to manage my emotions. Unlike Alcoholics Anonymous, these meetings ended with everyone heading to a bar. While there, one guy asked, You haven't even told your wife you know about her cheating? I shook my head. Damn, he said. I flipped out, slapped my wife, and chased the guy out the door. She even told me she was going on a date with him, and he had the audacity to grin when she said it. I was kicking in his car door, trying to get to him when the cops arrived. That's why I'm court-ordered to attend these meetings for anger management. Curious, I asked if others here were in the same situation. Some seemed a little too entertained by my story. Are they here for the drama or for help? The guy gave me a blank look. Drama? What do you mean? Like that old joke about the kid going to confession, I said. He admits to being with a girl, and the priest keeps asking if it's one of 3 specific girls. Afterward, the kid tells his friend, I have to say 10 Hail Marys, but now I've got 3 good leads. The men around the table burst into laughter. One of them said, You seem like a good guy. If you ever want someone to handle things while you're conveniently at church, let me know. I asked how he could trust I wasn't an undercover cop setting him up. Because I've worked with your brother as a subcontractor. I remember you from the job site. You probably don't recognize me because I used to have long hair and a beard. Too recognizable, you know? I made a mental note to ask my brother about him later. For now, I explained that I was following my lawyer's advice. Getting everything in order before serving the divorce papers. After limiting myself to 2 beers, I left the bar. Surprisingly, I felt better. Maybe there's something to this idea of venting your frustrations to strangers. It felt good to let it all out, but I still had a mission to complete. 2 weeks later, I arrived late to another meeting. Everyone else was seated as the therapist spoke about the importance of verbalizing anger instead of acting on it. The room broke into cheers when I entered. Glad you're back, Gary, the therapist said. These guys want to hear the rest of your story. I forced a grin as I stepped to the podium. A couple of weeks ago, I shared how my wife cheated on me with her boss and maybe got pregnant by him, and also had her secretary involved. Today, I'll tell you how it unfolded from there. At that point, I hadn't yet informed the secretary's husband or her boss's wife. They deserved to know, but I didn't want them to ruin my plans by overreacting. I wanted Ava to have an experience she'd never forget, and not the kind she'd enjoy. That Thursday night, I finally reached out to both spouses, apologizing for the delay. Then, I told them everything. I planned for Ava to be served with the divorce papers at the airport upon her return on Sunday afternoon. I advised the spouses of the other cheaters to contact lawyers and gave them my attorney's contact information. I asked them not to call or text their spouses to reveal that they'd been caught. Once the initial shock subsided, we started talking. It turned out that, like Ava, both of their cheating partners had been calling home every evening, expressing how much they missed their families and wished they were back home. We all recognized these calls for the lies they were. At my suggestion, Janice, Doug's wife, decided to take her kids to visit her sister and brother-in-law in Alexandria. She planned to confide in them and have their support when confronting Doug after his return. Apparently, this wasn't Doug's first affair. With 2 teenage children to consider, Janice had more than just her own emotions to manage. Bill, the secretary's husband, couldn't take the weekend off due to his job managing the maintenance department at the local Ford dealership. He promised not to call June, his wife, and joked that he wanted to strangle her, but needed to do it without witnesses. I suggested he attend this group, explaining how it had helped me manage similar impulses. His reaction earned a few chuckles from the others. I explained how I handled my finances, removing half of the funds from our shared savings and checking accounts to ensure Ava didn't drain them. In my case, the balances weren't substantial, but both Janice and Bill admitted to having significant amounts in their accounts. I also shared that I wasn't planning to cancel my credit cards until the last minute, but would ensure that any remaining balances were paid out of the joint account to split the costs fairly. After our discussion, I headed home to put my own plans into action. By now, you've probably heard what I did at home, and yes, the rumors are true. When I shared this part of my story, the group cheered and applauded. Taking a modest bow, I began explaining. I spent the week dismantling my home, literally. For those who remember, I did most of the renovations myself, with a bit of help from my brother. What I did was undo my work. I couldn't touch the sheetrock or the painted walls, but nearly everything else was fair game. I started by disconnecting every appliance and moving them away from the walls. The refrigerator, stove, and dishwasher were all unplugged, and even their wiring harnesses were removed. I carefully bagged all the hardware and taped it to each appliance. The garbage disposal, along with the disassembled sink and faucets, was left in the middle of the kitchen floor. While I left most of the kitchen cabinets in place, I removed a few that could be taken down without much effort, just to demonstrate to Ava that her dream kitchen was no longer what she remembered. I didn't touch the one-piece kitchen counters, as removing them would have caused damage, but the bathrooms were a different story. In the bathrooms, I drained and removed the toilets, dismantled the vanities, and even took off the faucet handles. I scraped away the plaster and caulk from the edges of the vanities and sinks, leaving behind what looked like a collection of old bathroom fixtures. Only bare pipes and capped valves protruded from the walls. Like the kitchen counters, I left the tub and shower intact, as removing them would have caused damage. Next, I turned my attention to the bedroom. The bed frame and mattress were disassembled and stacked neatly in the hallway. My wife's dresser was emptied of her clothes, which I placed in the closet. Of course, the closet no longer had its charming louvered doors. Our furniture, though stylish and expensive, was mostly the kind that came unassembled. Since Ava hadn't helped put it together, I took the liberty of returning it to its original state. Shelves, tables, and even the credenza that held her knickknacks were reduced to piles of parts, with all hardware carefully bagged. The final touches included removing all the ceiling fans and light fixtures, except for the dining room chandelier, from which I unscrewed the light bulbs. I even took out every electrical switch and socket cover, capping the wires for safety, even though the power was off. The air conditioning system was installed by a contractor, so I left it intact. The same went for the water heater, which I had installed myself. As for everything I removed from cabinets, shelves, and walls, I didn't want to keep anything that would remind me of Ava. So, I arranged it all in the master bedroom. Every dish, glass, and figurine was laid out neatly, covering the floor from the closet to the doorway. It was impossible to walk through without clearing a path first. Not that the closet had a door anymore. In fact, the only doors I left hanging were the exterior ones for security. As an accountant, I kept receipts for every item we bought for the house. Since these were paid for with joint funds, I planned to give Ava back her share, just without the effort I put into the house. Ava hadn't contributed beyond choosing appliances and helping plan the renovations. I kept a few mobile items, like the coffee maker and microwave, to add to her list of grievances. By the time Ava's plane landed, the house was fully dismantled. I received a call from the process server, who handed her the divorce papers as soon as she arrived. June had driven them to the airport, dropping them off before heading home. Back at the house, my brother and a few neighbors who had been watching my progress all week joined me. They could confirm my whereabouts and actions during this time. While we waited for Ava and the others to return, we indulged in steaks from my freezer and drinks from my liquor cabinet. I had taken the rest of the food to Ava's mother earlier in the week, using a fake excuse about a broken freezer. That didn't explain the canned goods and condiments, but I didn't care. When Ava walked through the door, she was about to see exactly what I'd been doing while she was away. I dropped her off, noticing that the poor woman was too stunned to ask any questions. I knew she'd figure it out soon enough. June lingered just long enough to let Ava and Doug out of the van. I couldn't help but wonder why Doug even bothered coming back with her. I strolled around to the front of the house, leaving the others to watch from the side as Ava climbed out of the van, followed by her lover, Doug. Both of them looked furious. Ava was shouting, waving the envelope she had received, while Doug angrily threatened legal action, accusing me of spreading lies about him. He declared he would ruin me legally for damaging his reputation. I had filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, naming him as one of the parties involved. While the courts don't typically care about the reasons behind a divorce, citing adultery added a layer of public embarrassment as it became part of the official record. Right on schedule, Doug's wife, Janice, pulled up with her sister. I had been tracking Ava's phone, so I knew when she'd arrive and had called Janice to coordinate. Janice had already called me earlier to share what she had discovered when she returned home from her weekend away. She had asked if I'd been to her house, and I truthfully told her I'd been busy dismantling my own home and only left to sleep at my brother's place. Apparently, she couldn't park in her garage when she got home because the driveway was filled with car parts. Not just any car parts, pieces of her husband's cherished 1965 Ford Mustang. The car, which had been his father's and later restored by Doug, held immense sentimental value. It was his first car, and he often showed it off to visitors. People used to joke that Doug loved the Mustang more than his wife and kids, and that may not have been far from the truth. When Janice arrived, Doug tried to explain himself with a pathetic denial, claiming that anything she might have heard was a lie. However, Janice didn't mention what was waiting for him at home. Meanwhile, Ava took her suitcase inside, only to unleash a blood-curdling scream moments later. She stormed back to the door, shouting, "What the hell did you do to my house?" I knew she hadn't yet fully explored the mess I'd left behind. She had only seen the items piled in the living room. I was surprised she hadn't noticed the missing blinds and curtains before entering the house. Every window was bare because I'd removed the blinds, dismantled them, and folded up the drapes. As I stepped inside, followed by my brother and the others, I calmly explained to Ava what I had done. "I'm preparing the house to divide our assets 50-50, I told her. She demanded to know where her belongings were. I gestured toward the floor and added that her clothes and personal items were neatly stored in the bedroom closet. When she checked, her reaction was predictable. She let out another piercing scream. In all our years together, I had never heard her shriek like that. Someone had called the police, and the first officer on the scene was soon joined by several others, including a supervisor. I had already called my attorney, knowing Ava was on her way, and he arrived shortly after. He apologized for being late, explaining that he'd changed clothes before heading over. Ava demanded to know where she was supposed to stay that night and insisted the police arrest me. My lawyer quickly shut that down, informing the officers that I had done nothing illegal. "This is a matter for civil court," he said firmly. Doug, clearly flustered, asked his wife to take him home. Janice refused, then coldly asked why he hadn't checked his phone. She had sent him several texts hours earlier. Doug brushed it off, assuming the messages were about the accusations of infidelity. While juggling multiple conversations, I answered Ava's question about her car. I told her truthfully that it was exactly where she had left it, in the garage. She stormed back inside, only to return moments later, fuming because the garage door wouldn't open. I explained that the electricity was off and that I had also dismantled the garage door opener. Doug suggested she use the emergency release to open the door, but Ava had no idea what that was. He followed her inside to help, but they quickly returned, with Doug demanding to know where the release handle was. I shrugged and told him it was somewhere nearby, carefully labeled, just like everything else I had disassembled. Meanwhile, Janice dropped her own bombshell. She told the officers she hadn't called them about her issue yet, then showed the lead officer photos on her phone. His expression turned to utter disbelief. Janice explained that when she arrived home, she found her driveway and garage filled with the dismantled remains of Doug's prized Mustang. Every part had been meticulously removed and laid out. The officers questioned me, but I pointed out that I had witnesses who could confirm I'd been at my own home all weekend. Unable to retrieve her car, and with Janice refusing to drive Doug home, they called June, who arrived visibly upset and teary-eyed. Her husband had met her outside their home earlier, handed her clothes stuffed into garbage bags, and told her not to return until she spoke with a lawyer. Now, Ava and Doug loaded their luggage into June's van. Janice urged Doug again to check his phone. When he finally did, he let out a yell that rivaled Ava's earlier screams. He demanded June drive him home immediately. Janice had followed a suggestion I'd made when she first called me, and her brother-in-law had been waiting at her house to handle the fallout. When the police wrapped up their work at my house, my brother and I decided to follow the group to Doug's home. By the time we arrived, a news van was parked outside. The reporter was interviewing Janice's brother-in-law about what they had found. The cameraman had already captured footage of the scene. Doug's driveway resembled a model car kit. At its center sat the car's stripped chassis. Doors were laid out on either side, the hood sat in front, and the trunk was behind. Every major component, the engine, transmission, and drivetrain, had been meticulously removed and arranged. Smaller parts like belts and hoses were lined up neatly. Even the seats had been pulled out and set to the side. Doug's cherished Mustang had been reduced to its individual components, a fitting symbol of the chaos he had created in all of our lives. The scene was unforgettable. I'd never witnessed a car so meticulously disassembled. Every piece was arranged in an orderly fashion, not that it mattered to Doug, who completely lost it. He collapsed to his knees, wailing, and then started crying. At one point, he screamed, "Sally is destroyed!" Curious, I turned to Janice and asked, "Who's Sally?" Standing nearby, the television reporter listened while Janice explained that Doug had named his car Sally after the song Mustang Sally. I couldn't contain my laughter, nearly doubling over as I pictured the absurdity of the situation. The reporter seemed to find it amusing as well. Once the news segment aired, the story went viral, spreading across social media. They even used the song Mustang Sally as the background music for the broadcast. None of the betrayed spouses were hiding. We made sure the names of all three cheaters, Doug, Ava, and June, were included in the story. Doug, of course, accused each of us of being responsible for his car's disassembly, but we all had airtight alibis. June's husband, Bill, had worked all day Saturday at the dealership and spent the rest of the weekend with their children. While he had the mechanical knowledge and potential resources to do the job, investigators found no evidence linking him to the act. Not a single fingerprint, aside from Doug's, was discovered on any part of the car, not even on the carefully stacked lug nuts. Janice, meanwhile, had spent the weekend with her sister and brother-in-law, and even her kids confirmed her whereabouts. She loudly declared that if she had been the one to dismantle the car, she would have done it with a hammer, and was still considering finishing the job. Even the officers couldn't help but laugh at her remark. As for me, I became the prime suspect due to the methodical nature of the act. However, I also had an ironclad alibi. I reminded them that I'm not a mechanic. I specialize in home renovations, not car repairs. Plus, I barely own more than a couple of screwdrivers and wrenches. On top of that, I had been busy taking apart my house under the watchful eyes of my neighbors, who could vouch for me. The entire scene at Doug's house was like a circus. Ava was stuck there because she had no other means of transportation, and June had been thrown out of her own home. Even my father-in-law showed up after Ava called him. He stood there wide-eyed, taking in the spectacle. The next day, the reporter reached out for a follow-up interview. She had heard about what I'd done to my house and wanted to include that in her story. I handed her one of the 20 flash drives I'd prepared, each containing footage of how I systematically dismantled my home. She condensed the 5 hours of video into a 2-minute segment for television. Those flash drives turned out to be invaluable. I handed them out like candy, each one containing evidence of Ava, Doug, and June's infidelity. Doug tried to get a restraining order to stop me from publishing anything about his affairs. However, by the time the order was issued, nearly all the flash drives had already been distributed. I couldn't control what happened next. Clips of their explicit encounters, including Doug swapping roles with his two partners, began circulating online. The most humiliating footage, Doug using June's toy while his face was buried in Ava's lap, didn't make it to television, but spread rapidly across the internet. The fact that there was video evidence of the trio caught in the act became a frequent talking point, even in news broadcasts. Currently, my situation remains uncertain. I'm pushing for the divorce to be finalized quickly, but Ava is trying to stay married for the baby's sake. The expedited paternity test, which Ava initially opposed, revealed that the child isn't mine. Although the test cost extra, I'll recover some of the expense from our joint assets. Ava had wanted to delay the test until after the baby's birth, but the public nature of everything forced her hand despite her attorney's advice. What Ava plans to do next is unclear. Whether Doug steps up to take responsibility is not my concern. For all I know, the baby might not even be his. Ava's lawyer argued that I destroyed my home, while mine contended that I simply reclaimed my work, with nothing damaged and all components ready for resale. Meanwhile, the investigation into Doug's Mustang has reached a dead end. The prevailing theory is that the dismantling required a team of skilled mechanics. The meticulous removal of major components, without leaving a mess of oil, coolant, or transmission fluid, indicated expertise. Parts prone to damage, like manifold covers and valve assemblies, were left untouched. Bill, June's husband, admitted to investigators that disassembling the car so cleanly would require serious skill. He privately told me he admired the work, joking that he'd hire whoever did it because they clearly knew their stuff. He also assured me he had nothing to do with it, as much as he loved the idea. Doug paid a hefty price to have the parts collected and stored. Janice gave him 2 days to clear her driveway, warning that if he didn't, she'd hire local kids to pile the junk under the carport where the Mustang had been kept. Doug didn't doubt her seriousness. Before anyone thinks I came out of this unscathed, let me clarify, I didn't escape the fallout. The day after Ava returned home, I was fired from my job. My boss, a close friend of Doug's, often referred clients to him and received referrals in return. In fact, it had been my boss who originally suggested that Ava work for Doug. When I was told I was being let go, I leaned across my boss's desk and asked him directly if he had been involved in any of the extracurricular activities, and specifically, if he had been with my wife. He denied it, but that didn't stop me from having a little chat with his wife to plant the suggestion. I suspected my former boss might be claiming I was stealing clients, but that accusation was quickly dismissed when I demonstrated that many of those clients were ones I had originally brought to the firm. Some clients even stated they didn't trust the firm anymore after I was fired. I've agreed to manage all the accounts that followed me pro bono for 2 months while working for my brother at minimum wage. Ava's lawyer has argued that I'm intentionally avoiding earning a substantial income. My counter was that I was simply helping friends while deciding on my next career move. I've set up a part-time pro bono accounting firm in an unused office space in my brother's building. I mentioned to the group, if anyone needs an accountant, let me know, which earned me a few cheers from the audience. While I felt slightly better about my circumstances, I couldn't ignore the reality. I'd lost my wife, my home, and my dreams, none of which could ever be recovered. 3 weeks later, I returned to the anger management group. Stepping to the podium, I addressed the room. I see many familiar faces here. I'm guessing you're here for the same reasons I am. Managing emotions is tough, isn't it? No, scratch that. Keeping them under control all the time is the real challenge. I added, as I'm sure your therapists often say, there's a thin line between anger and depression. I now talk to 2 therapists. To be honest, this wasn't my decision. Some of you may be here because the court required it, but in my case, it was my sister-in-law's ultimatum. One day, while we were having dinner, my 8-year-old nephew blurted out, "Uncle Gary, are you mad all the time because Aunt Ava was so mean?" When asked where he'd heard that, he pointed at me and said he overheard me talking to his dad. My sister-in-law shot me a look that clearly said, "Fix this." So, I carefully explained, "It's not polite to use that word, but yes, I'm very upset with Aunt Ava." Then came the kicker. My nephew nodded and replied, "Okay, I won't say that again. I like her, but it's too bad she acts that way." You can imagine the death glares I got from my sister-in-law, while my brother struggled to suppress laughter, staring at his plate. My sister-in-law sternly warned me to watch what I said around the kids if I wanted to keep staying with them. The situation got even more amusing when my 6-year-old niece piped up. "Boys? I didn't know Uncle Gary had kids. Where are they?" My sister-in-law clarified that the boys were her husband, their son, and her brother. Then, in true childlike innocence, my niece added, "Oh, so when you told Miss Sandy your girls were sore from too much rough play, you meant because I fell and scraped my knee?" Honestly, I didn't catch the rest because I was laughing too hard, though my sister-in-law looked mortified. To sum up, if I want to continue living with my brother and his family, I must stick with therapy, including these group sessions. I explained to the group that I can't afford to live on my own right now. I don't have a steady income, and even renting an apartment is nearly impossible without verifiable earnings. My sister-in-law, while kind and generous, doesn't want her children negatively influenced by my struggles. Over the past 3 weeks, I've deliberately kept my income minimal, earning slightly more than Ava did before I lost my job. Privately, I suspect her high salary was less about her skills and more about the extra services she provided her boss. However, my lawyer advised me to keep those thoughts to myself, especially since the small income gap between us means I won't owe alimony. As for the others involved in this mess, Janice kicked Doug out and filed for divorce. His beloved car, Sally, is now in storage, and their divorce is, unsurprisingly, a disaster. Janice made it clear she's determined to take him for everything he has. While I'm sure she meant it figuratively, I wouldn't want to be called as a witness if things turned physical. Doug's work troubles are mounting. Rumors have circulated that some of his negotiations may have been sweetened by intimate favors from Ava and June. While all 3 deny the allegations, certain clients are taking them seriously and pulling their business. The firm itself is facing issues in other areas, particularly in handling cases of workplace harassment. Several clients have filed grievances, claiming the firm can't even manage its internal affairs. As a result, Doug is becoming more of a liability than an asset, and there's talk that he may soon be forced out. Adding to his woes, people have taken to driving past his office, blaring Mustang Sally at full volume. While I don't feel sorry for him, I do enjoy the thought of him being put in his place. Ava's income is also likely to drop. Her salary as a paralegal was unusually high for someone with limited experience, leading to speculation that part of her compensation was for extracurricular activities. Similar accusations have been made about June, who is the only one of the three cheaters trying to save her marriage. She admitted to Bill that her interest in using toys on others stemmed from a sense of power and claimed she never allowed Doug to touch her sexually. She insisted that Ava was submissive and would do whatever she commanded. Bill told me he might consider staying with her if she agrees to a post-nuptial agreement. As for my marriage, it's over. Even if the baby had been mine, I wouldn't stay with Ava. The paternity test confirmed I'm not the father, which helped solidify my decision. The judges, plural since Ava appealed, ruled I was justified in reclaiming my sweat equity in the house, as nothing was damaged and all components were ready for resale. Ava moved her belongings out of the bedroom after her father helped with the costs, but I refused to assist. She tried to use the opportunity to talk, but I declined without my lawyer present. During the asset division, I suggested Ava take half the appliances and fixtures, offering her the first choice, down to the toilets. Her lawyer eventually demanded everything be sold at auction, which didn't bother me. My brother ended up buying the house for less than I'd originally offered, which worked out for both of us. Now, I'm living in my brother's guest room and helping restore the house.